Shalom Avracha to all of our viewers and listeners. Today we'd like to speak about a very important subject, Jewish survival in times of crises, Yosef and the thematic link to Chanukah. And as we say, we're speaking about Chanukah, and that we would like to start explaining something about Chanukah, then we will revert back to Yosef HaTzadik and try to show how he was able to, so to speak, pave the way for all of us in Golos, in times of crisis, how to survive. As we celebrate Chanukah, which will of course commence on Sunday, B'ezras Hashem Yisbarach, we should bear in mind the fact that the essential name of Chanukah, which is called the holiday, it's a holiday of Chanukah, indicates basically a dual aspect. On the one hand, it's a sense of rededication to the Beis HaMikdash and to Kodshei Hashem. We know that the Jewish people were able to recapture the Beis HaMikdash, and they were able to purify it, and they were able to resume the avodas hamikdash, the sacrifices, and all the other ceremonies in the Beis Hamikdash. So on the one hand, it's a sense of rededication to the Beis Hamikdash in Yerushalayim. That's, of course, in the narrow context. And on the other hand, in the broader context, there was a sense of rejuvenation and regeneration to all spiritual values in the much broader context, to the entire realm of Torah and mitzvahs and the service of the Jewish people to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The chain of events that transpired during the original historical period of Chanukah, with the Yevonim exerting their domination, their military and political dominance over the Jewish people, and they decreed, Gezeiros, decrees against the Torah and mitzvahs. They wanted we should forget the Torah, and we should simply abandon doing mitzvahs. We should be just like the Gentiles, without any mitzvahs, without learning Torah. We should forget about our unique religious commitment to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And if the Jewish people historically would have agreed to this proposition, so the Yevonim, in their great generosity and in their thanksgiving to the Jewish people for abandoning their religion, would have given us independence, sovereignty in the land of Israel, and in addition, they would have supported us financially, politically, and any other need that the Jewish people would have at that time. Of course, in contradiction to Purim, we all know that even if the Jewish people would have abandoned their religion, they would have abandoned the Kadosh Baruch Hu. They would have acted treacherously vis-a-vis the Jewish religion, and ipso facto God. It would not have helped them, because the Gezerah, the decree of Haman, Harosha, against the Jewish people was lahashmid, laharoi, to totally annihilate, totally wipe off the Jewish people in Persia from the face of the map. So this was basically the difference between Chanukah and Purim. And the chain of events that took place during this original historical period of Chanukah resulted, Baruch Hashem, in great miracles that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wrought for the Jewish people. However, it was not merely a process of removing and purging the insidious and subversive elements of the Greeks, of the Yevonim, externally and internally. They were removed, purged from the Klal Yisrael, and we have the feeling that the Jewish people, so to speak, return to the original point of departure. This is wrong. Even though the original point of departure before the decree of Shibud Yavon, of the subjugation to Yavon, so it might have been a very pristine state that the Jewish people found themselves. This preceded the effects of Hellenism and, of course, religious persecution, which resulted in assimilation. There was the element of the Jewish people that were not able to, so to speak, resist the difficulties, and they Hellenized and they were assimilated. But actually, after the victory, the Jewish people went above and beyond to lofty, dizzying heights. We shall explain that a little bit later. On this level, Chanukah is really analogous to Purim. As we said, this is the name, this is the nomenclature of the word Chanukah. When the Jewish people were miraculously saved in the times of Haman HaRasha from the brink of disaster. So our sages told us that the Jewish people upgraded, intensified their dedication and devotion to Torah and mitzvahs, and once again, there was a reenactment of receiving the Torah, but in this specific instance, everybody accepted the Torah with great love and devotion. There was no coercion. There was no element of being forced to accept the Torah, not Torah Shebiksav, not Torah Shebal Peh. It was done willingly with great love. So we see that the after effects of Haman, the times of Achashverosh, were tremendous after effects that Klal Yisrael reached even greater heights than they had attained before Haman decreed a total annihilation of the Jewish people. And it's interesting that in general, when a person is confronted with the ultimate danger and his very high exist awareness is being called into question, like it was in the times of Purim, then the parallel question of Lama Zeh Anochi, what is my purpose in life? What is the meaning to my life? And we try to understand that meaning. What is the purpose of life? So the nature and substance of events quite naturally precipitates this type of questioning, Lama Zeh Anochi, what's the purpose of me coming into the world? Because when one is confronted with ultimate danger, he's likely to ask the ultimate questions. A great philosopher once wrote in his journal that the most important episode in his life occurred when he was riding in a coach, and as the driver took a sudden turn, he fell out and was almost killed. So seeing the Malach HaMavet, the angel of death, in front of his eyes, so this itself was an event that precipitated him to re-examine all of his previous thinking, and consequently he became the dominant philosopher of his age. So this episode precipitated this individual to reach even greater heights. Of course, if this is true regarding an individual, it's particularly so vis-a-vis the Klal Yisrael, the entire Jewish people. For in the case of the philosopher, the danger happened to be incidental and accidental. The coach turned over. Whereas in the times of Haman, the danger to the Jewish people arose out of their clearly defined identity as a singular people. On the other hand, Purim was more extreme insofar as the sakana, as a danger for the existence of Klal Yisrael. Chanukah was not a challenge to the very gut level of mere existence. And therefore, subsequently, the Ness of Purim was basically a Ness of survival. As we mentioned a moment ago, Chanukah surely does not measure up to that scale. Yet the dangerous confrontation in the times of religious persecution on Chanukah in certain aspects was greater than that of Purim, because the struggle against the Greeks, if the Yevonim emanated from Greece or from Syria, we don't know exactly, but the dangerous confrontation on Chanukah and the struggle against the enemy involved fundamental spiritual issues. Will the Jewish people be able to overwhelm the debilitating impact of religious persecution? Basic spiritual issues were involved. Consequently, the confrontation focused on the very heart and the very essence of Klal Yisrael, which is, of course, Torah and mitzvahs. Moreover, the imminent danger of Purim related to a community in Persia. It was basically isolated. Although no one can minimize the importance of safety and security to any Jewish community, nonetheless, the issue is particular to Persia and not of universal dimensions of whether the Jewish people will continue to be a unique entity serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu with great devotion and dedication, even at the risk of their lives. So therefore, Chanukah, in contrast to Purim, is basically a Klal Yisrael issue. And the Ramban states it in Parshas Vayeshev. And he says, were it not for the military victory over the enemy, Torah Sheba'al Peh, the oral tradition, would have been forgotten eternally. And there would be no Torah, because after all, the Greeks also had a translation of the Torah Shebiksav, of the 5 books of Moses. Therefore, the focus of Chanukah is not quantified to a limited, to defined community, but basically it transcends all boundaries and place consciousness, like the Rambam points out in Parshas Ba'alo Yisrael. So, of course, following the victory, the usual spontaneous celebration erupts. Nevertheless, the nature and the substance of the events of Chanukah have now assumed a life of their own. And the heroic defiance, like the Chazal tell us in the Alanisim Broche that we recite in the Shemin Esrei, in the Tefillah, during the time of Chanukah. So we see Masarti Giberim B'Yad Chaloshim. It was a courageous, heroic defiance to all challenges and all attacks against the Jewish norms. And the victory served as a powerful, dynamic agent to personal regeneration and rededication to the task of the time. And we could ask ourselves, in our own turbulent times, are we entitled to a less exacting sacrificial role? Nevertheless, the focus of the shir today will be on how did the Jewish people survive during that critical time. Now we should like to go back to Parshas Vayeshev and focus on Yosef HaTzadik. The point of departure will be the question that the Ramban asked. 22 years after Yosef was sold to Mitzrayim as a lowly servant, 22 long, dreary, dark years passed, and Yosef HaTzadik, says the Ramban, was not in contact with his father. How did Yosef HaTzadik let his father suffer with such agony and misery for 22 years? He knew that his father was very deeply emotionally attached to him. After all, he was singled out to have the Ksainis Pasim. He ben zikunim loy. The Torah tells us, clear, cannot be clear that he was singled out as an object of love. The Yisrael ohav es Yosef mikol bodov ki ben zikunim hu loy v'asa loy Ksainis Pasim. And Yaakov, that's his father, of course, Yisrael, loved Yosef more than all of his sons because he was a son of his old age. He was a Talmid Chacham. He also had the countenance of his father, and he made him as an expression of his love, Ksainis Pasim, a multicolored coat. This awareness, of course, was not limited to what the Torah tells us objectively. The brothers understood too, and they said that they actually saw that Yosef was singled out as an object of love. So there's no question about it. Yosef was aware, there's no doubt about this. Yosef was aware of how much his father loved him, and ipso facto, the extent of the mourning and grief that his father had in the absence of Yosef. And Yosef could have relieved his father from this unbearable agony and misery by simply writing a letter. And the Ramban says it would have been a chet gadol. It would have been a terrible sin on the part of Yosef HaTzadik had he not had a rationale that the dreams should be fulfilled, and that, so to speak, was the rationale that allowed him not to get in contact with his father and await the great moment when his father, Yaakov Avinu, and all the brothers will come down to Mitzrayim and they will prostrate themselves to Yosef, and that will be the fulfillment of the dreams. That is the Ramban's answer. Of course, it's difficult to understand that Yosef HaTzadik would allow his father to be grief-stricken, to be in unbelievable agony and misery, because he was more interested in having the dreams come true. Even if the dreams were Ruach HaKodesh, there's no question about it that they were a type of Ruach HaKodesh. It was a divine spirit that led Yosef to believe that this will ultimately come true. But nevertheless, we do not understand that there should be a rationale for such behavior. The question is an unbelievable, difficult question. However, we would like to suggest the answer. And this answer, basically speaking, is something which coincides with the simple reading of the Psukim. Of course, the Ohr HaChaim HaKadosh says his answer. The Ramban, as we mentioned, also says an answer. Eidu veidu divrei Elokim Chayim. What the Ramban says is emes lamita shel Torah, is surely the truth, and what the Ohr HaChaim HaKadosh says is also Torah's emes. However, perhaps we have the permission to suggest a more simple answer that really corresponds contextually and textually to what we're reading in the parsha. After Yosef was sold, so Yosef analyzes all the events that led up to the fact that the Shvatim, his brothers, decided that he deserves to be killed. They did him a favor by selling him to the caravan of the Yishmaelim. So Yosef HaTzadik now starts to analyze, starts to review all the episodes, all the events that led up to this. And he comes to the conclusion that it's perfectly understandable. Why is that? Because there were certain things that before, and that was during the time that the event transpired, so Yosef could not make sense of it. Retrospectively, when Yosef undertakes introspection and tries to review everything, so it is clear to him exactly what transpired. The Torah tells us at the very beginning something which we don't understand totally, but that's what the Torah tells us, that the first interpersonal relationship between Yosef and his brothers comes to its revelation with the fact that first and foremost, Vayove Yosef as the basam ro el aviyah. As soon as we start reading the section of the Torah entitled Vayeshev, so we see that the first action on the part of Yosef, he brought evil tales about them to their father. And Rashi is mind-boggling. Rashi says, we'll just quote Rashi, Kol rosh shoyoroya be'echov b'nei Leah v'yamagid la'oviv shoyorichem ever benachai u'mizalzim b'nei hashvachas. Every type of criticism, of lashon hara, of evil tales that Yosef could perhaps see that his brothers had undertaken. It was a type of corrupt behavior. They ate Ever Minachai. They treated with great disrespect the sons of the Bilah, the Zilpah, and other types of, and also immorality, which we don't understand, of course, by Shifteko. But this is exactly the way he related and associated with his brothers, by simply being a talebearer, criticizing them, speaking negatively and evil about his brothers. Afterwards, he has dreams. Both dreams, basically speaking, have one point of departure. There's one salient feature, that ultimately he will be the one that will be the dominant of this Shifteka. He will be predominant. He will be the superior, and they will be inferior. That is what the dreams indicate. We're all familiar with the dreams, and the dreams indicated that he will be predominant, his brothers will be subjugated to him, and this will be something which will be eternal. He lacked tact, and Yosef actually related these dreams with their interpretation to the brothers and to his father. And of course, Yaakov Avinu rebuked him, he reprimanded him. And Yaakov Avinu says, the Torah tells us he rebuked him, and he said to him, what kind of dreams do you have? You actually think, you actually believe me, your mother, that she's not even alive, will ultimately, your brothers will come and prostrate themselves to you to the ground? So Yosef HaTzadik, at this point, retrospectively, sees that he conducted himself totally wrong, in a corrupt way. And we don't want to speak too long about every event, but everyone knows this. Everyone asks the question, how could it be that his father actually sent him to Shrem, where his brothers were involved with the sheep, pasturing the sheep? Haloi Shrem is a Mokan Muad Leparanos, is a place which has, unfortunately, a character of bringing about evil events, punishment, and he sent him there. So Rashi points out that even though Yosef was aware that it was a sakana, and he knew that his father was aware that it's a danger for him to go away from home, to leave home, travel to where his brothers were, because his brothers, as the Psukim tell us, not only were jealous of him, but they actually had an enmity and a hatred for Yosef. And we don't take a chance of Yosef being isolated with his brothers because he's in mortal danger. So Yosef did not understand why his father was sent. Did not understand it. Shas Ma'aseh at that time could not understand it. We don't understand it. We understand that Yaakov was well aware of the entire interpersonal relationship, which had descended to hatred and jealousy, and indeed he was in great danger. Now, Baron Kotler told us something very unusual, but he proves it beyond any doubt. The Baron Kotler said that they were actually afraid of the fact that they would be rejected from being part of the Jewish nation. We know that Avram had two sons. Yishmael was rejected. He will not be the one that will be part and parcel of the Jewish nation. The Jewish nation will emanate from Yitzchak. Yishmael is excluded. Yitzchak had Esau. Esau was excluded. Esau is Edom. That's the Christian religion emanates from him. Islam emanates from Yishmael. So they were actually afraid that the Jewish nation would not consist of Yud Beis Shvatim, Elo would be one or two Shvatim that revolve around Yosef. The Baron Kotler says this was their great fear, and this is their understanding, and this is their reasoning for Yosef to be so hostile, militant, criticize them, speak the worst Lashon Hara about them, because he was interested that Yaakov Avinu should reject them from being part of the continuity of the Jewish people. This is what Baron Kotler said. So now we understand very well that the Sforno already said it before, that Yosef has a din roidef. He's actually pursuing their demise. He has a halachic status of a roidef, which means that he is bringing an individual into great danger, mortal danger. And in this specific case, it was a terrible, terrible danger which they were now experiencing, that they would be excluded totally from Klal Yisrael. There would be no shiftei kol. That was the intention of Yosef HaTzadik. So what did they do? They paskin the din roidef, that is chayav misa. That is the punishment of somebody who pursues someone with an intention of committing great harm to that individual. And this they understood was great harm. How great were the shiftei kol? They were able to bring HaKadosh Baruch Hu into a cherem that no one would reveal. No one, even HaKadosh Baruch Hu, would not reveal to Yaakov and not to Yitzchak, who was still alive at the time, that Yosef was condemned. He was tried, adjudicated, condemned to be a roidev, was chayav misa, and they actually did a favor to Yosef of kindness by selling him to be a slave. Unbelievable. So now he understands why Yaakov sent him to Shem, because when he arrived at Shem, they already had a complete psak din ready. And even if Yosef did not know that they brought down the Shechina, and the Shechina was linked up with this psak din of theirs and with the Cherem, even Yosef had no knowledge of that, but he was surely aware that the shiftei kol would be the greatest bezdin of all time. Not just at that period of time, of all time, they would be the greatest, most outstanding bezdin, judicial tribunal, and they were surely capable of being mitzvah of the Shechina, of bringing HaKadosh Baruch Hu into their psak din, their judicial decision, as well as the cherem that they made that no one should say this to Yaakov Avinu. So it makes perfect sense. He understands there's no need to write a letter. What was the Ramban's question? Why did he not communicate? Write a letter. Tell Yaakov that he's still alive. It was purposeless. Why is it purposeless? Because there was no thought that Yosef had, that his father was not involved with the Shvatim in paskening the Gemar Din. The judicial decision that he's a right of and he's chayiv misa. Now he understands clear as the day why his father sent him to Shechem. Because his father held that he was going in a crooked way with Lashon Haras and Rechilus. And anybody who speaks Lashon Hara is like Yishefer Dom and has a din of a murderer. He's undermining them. He wants them rejected from being part of Klal Yisrael. And he rebuked him. So his no possibility that the brothers would have paskened the din, they would have tried him and found him guilty of being a roidef if it would not be in conjunction with his father. He would never in a million years suspect the Shiftei Takah would do something against his father's wishes. And on the contrary, his father participated in the selling of Yosef HaTzadik, insofar as the Gemara Din is concerned, because he deserved it. He deserved to have a din, a judicial decision of Chayiv Misa. So what's the purpose in writing a letter? What's the purpose in communicating with him? Yaakov Avinu with the brothers was one entity. Everything was done judiciously. Everything was done with a pragmatic understanding that he's the one that should be rejected from being part of the Shiftei Takah. He does not represent the exalted morality and ethics of the Jewish people. This is the answer we would like to suggest. The derech hapshat hapashut, according to the simple meaning of the psukim, it was absolutely useless to try to communicate with Yankov, because Yankov participated from the beginning to the end with his sons to excommunicate Yosef, to have Yosef tried, found guilty, and condemned to death as a roidef. At this juncture, we see something which is unbelievable and remarkable, and it's even difficult to express. How did Yosef feel at this point in time? He felt totally lost. He felt that he was lost from the world to come because the Shiftei Takah were from the greatest of all generations, and they found him guilty and condemned to death. So he lost Olam Haba. He lost the world, the hereafter. What about the here and now, this world? He can't even beg mercy from his own father, because his own father is opposed to him. His own father is militant and hostile against him. His own father condemned him to death. So he is totally lost from both worlds. And all of a sudden, Yosef, then in Kabbalah, the mysticism is represented as being the most moral and ethical person of all time. So all of a sudden, Yosef HaTzadik finds himself in the most immoral place possible, in Mitzrayim, which the Torah said is Ervas Haaretz. Here's the place of total immorality. The very atmosphere is saturated with immorality, and he will now have unbelievable trials and tribulations. How can he overwhelm them? Totally broken in body, crushed in spirit, has no family. His family abandoned him, but not only abandoned him, they held that he was culpable and liable to be put to death. HaKadosh Baruch Hu surely agreed with them. HaKadosh Baruch Hu was part and parcel of the cherem, of the excommunication, that nobody should reveal it. So how did Yosef HaTzadik exist in this crisis? How will he have the inner strength, the motivation and inspiration in the worst crisis that anybody can go through, where he can't even beg his father for mercy Take me back. I should have a home and not be abandoned totally. 17 years old. How could he exist? Because Yosef HaTzadik came through all these trials and tribulations with one fundamental lesson, and that's the lesson that we learn. That lesson is that even if I don't deserve Olam Haba, and if I don't have Olam Haz, I have no home, I have no father, I have no mother, I have no brothers. They all acted according to the halacha and simply excommunicated me, but I will not abandon HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And Yosef HaTzadik at that point, in the dark, dreary night, said to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you are mine and I am yours, because a father in heaven will never abandon a child, regardless of whether the child will have Olam Haba or not, regardless of how bad the child is, regardless whether the child is Chayiv Misa. Makes no difference, because the warm, loving Father in heaven loves all of his children regardless. And because that feeling arose like a geyser at that point, so Yosef HaTzadik was able to withstand all trials and tribulations in the land of Egypt, which is the most immoral place possible in the entire world. The very atmosphere is saturated with immorality. And it's interesting, it's really fascinating that the Agro de Pirka brings down a Chazal, which now we have the Meiri in Psochim and Nachman Aleph, who says it verbatim, but he brings it down from the Baal Shem Tov, but really it was already mentioned in a previous Sefer that dates back to the first generation of Achroinim, the Reishis Chochmah. And that is, the Gemara says that there was a Baskol that came out, a heavenly voice that came out and said, anything that the Balabayas, the host, tells us to do, so you should do, except if he tells us, say, exit. Who's the Balabayas? That's HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And whom was this Baskol directed at? Acher. Acher was a Tana, Kedosh Elikim, who unfortunately abandoned his Judaism. Things took place which he couldn't understand, and that caused him to abandon his Judaism to the extent that he rode a horse on Shabbos, desecrated Shabbos. He, of course, was the illustrious Rebbe of Reb Meir, till, unfortunately, he left the fold. So this was addressed to him. So the question naturally arises, why was this addressed to him? Because after everything is said and done, the Vayeshev Secret reports to us that the Lashon of the Yerushalmi, what is the formulation of this Baskol? Kol ma sheba'al habayis omer lecha aseh, chutz mitzeh, and that was directed to Acher. Whatever HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells you, he's the real Baal Habayis to do, for you to do, chutz mitzeh, except to go out. And had Acher had seichel, and he would have realized that he's capable of doing tshuva, we would have accepted him, HaKadosh Baruch Hu would have accepted him with open arms. He was unable to come to the cognitive understanding that even in his terrible state, spiritually, he was still capable of doing tshuva and being reaccepted, and the HaKadosh Baruch Hu would give him his entire preeminent stature in return. So the Agro Pirka explains to us that according to tradition, the Maggid Mi, who was one of the Talmidim Muvhakim of the Baal Shem Tov, and he was one of the successors of the Baal Shem Tov, lived in terrible poverty. And one Erev Shabbos, his wife came to him and said she doesn't have money to make Shabbos. So the Magbi Mezerich groaned. Oy. And he heard a heavenly voice come through, and the heavenly voice said, you just lost your Olam Haba. Because you're criticizing the way HaKadosh Baruch Hu was dealing with you, so you lost your Olam Haba. So the Magbi Mezerich, upon hearing this, went out in the street, and he started to dance and was happy and actually sung a song of joy. Why? Because he said, till now, I was afraid, as past experiences showed me that on occasion when I'm doing a service to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, a lofty service, and the Yetzer Hara, evil inclination, comes to me and says, Magbi Mezerich, you're doing a great job, it's a tremendous avodah that you're doing, and you'll be greatly rewarded for it. So now I have a terrible nisayon, I have a very difficult trial, because I have to now work on warding off what Antigna Shiseiche says, don't be like servants who serve the master for the reward. And the Yetzer Hara comes to me, evil inflation comes to me and tries to motivate me to do a more intensified service to HaKadosh Baruch Hu to get a reward. Now that I know I won't get any reward, so I will not have any more trials and tribulations, and I will be able to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu from a pure, pristine heart. That's the Magbi Mezerich. And that was a predecessor of the Jewish religion who displayed that characteristic. That was Yosef HaTzadik. And that's how Yosef HaTzadik survived. And like everyone says, he's the one that paved the way for all of us how to survive in Golus. None of us are in such a terrible crisis, type of situation like Yosef was, but this is the remedy. And this, on the contrary, will catapult us to great heights. The Jewish people in the times of religious persecution during Malchus Yavon, so the Pasuk explains to us, delineates what exactly was their situation. There was darkness in the world, and that is Malchus Yavon. The Greeks, Shechshuei Neim, the Yisrael B'Torah, they were able to darken our eyes. We should not be able to see Torah and not to see HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Yet, the Jewish people refused to capitulate. What exactly did the Yevonim want? Kisvu lachem al keren ashur, she'ein lachem chelek be'elokei Yisrael. You write on the horn of an ox that you have absolutely no chelek, no part of Elokei Yisrael. Reject HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And they had the military prowess to enforce this. What did they do? We know from the Svarim HaKadoshim, we know from our history, they tormented them, they persecuted. It was terrible. Yet Klal Yisrael, overwhelmed and overpowered even the brutal, cruel force of the Yevonim. And when they succeeded and were triumphant, so where was the expression of their triumph? The Beis HaMikdash. The Beis HaMikdash, that is where we have the Ashros HaShchina. That's where HaKadosh Baruch Hu's Shchina resides. And why is this the focus? The Alanism, we have this at the end. This is the, explain another time, this is the focus of the Alanism. The reason is because the Beis HaMikdash is the Mokom Vashros HaShchina, and that expressed the true triumph that we had over the persecution of the Yevonim. And what did we proclaim? Yesh lanu chelek be'elokei Yisrael. And the Ramban tells us in Parshas Ba'aloischa, unbelievable, something unbelievable. If we wanted to be Kohanim, we can't become Kohanim. Because once Zerah, Aaron was chosen, was selected to be Kohanim, we cannot be Kohanim. Nevertheless, the Ramban says that in the great dedication of the Mizbeach, in the Midbar, so all the representatives of the Shvatim brought karbonos. Aaron was excluded, and Aaron was broken, devastated, like a broken piece of parchment. So Kadosh Baruch Hu told him not to worry, because even though you were excluded from Chanukah HaMizbeach, for the dedication of the altar and the Mishkan, you will have a greater feat. You'll be able to be madlik the neiros in the Mishkan. You will light, clear out, clean out the menorah, and you will light the menorah. So the Ramban asked, but there's other avodas like Makter Ktoires, the spices that are done twice a day. Why exactly was this the compensation? Hadlokas, Vatovas Aneros. Why was this the compensation for Aaron HaKohen? So the Ramban says because it's a remez, it indicates an avodah that's permanent. It's a remez to Neiros Chanukah. It doesn't mean that Aaron now will be entitled to the unique avodah of lighting the candles in the Beis HaMikdash, in the Mishkan, which was the predecessor of the Beis HaMikdash, but he'll also have the unique mitzvah of Adlokas Ner Chanukah, and that will be forever. And the words of the Ramban are simply overwhelming. Shelcha kayam le'olam. Hadlokas neiros migdash is something which is an eternal avodah. Even after the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, it still comes to its revelation and its expression to Neiros Chanukah. The Chayzer Milublin said, we see over here something remarkable. For 1/2 an hour, everybody's home becomes transformed into a Beis HaMikdash. And everybody who lights the menorah has a dinner stature of a Kohen Gadol. And the menorah that we light, the Chanukiah that we call it, is like the Neiros Mikdash. Shelcha kayim li'olam. Your avodah of lighting the menorah, the Beis HaMikdash, is going to be eternal avodah, and it will come to its expression every year during the mitzvah of Adlakas Neiros Chanukah. So we see the great reward that Kadosh Baruch Hu gave us, that for a half hour we become Kohanim. For a half hour, our homes are a Beis HaMikdash, and we light the Neiros Mikdash. This is the exalted status and stature that Kadosh Baruch Hu bestows upon us. And the Chayzer said that we have to take this as a lesson to be extended for the entire year. And this is the way the greatest of the great, in all the annals and all the ages of history, responded to the greatest of all crises, how they existed, and how ultimately Yosef HaTzadik became exalted and reached dizzying heights.